Hi, this is Jeff Curto, and welcome to episode 74 of Camera Position, a podcast about the creative side of photography. Now, episode 74 of Camera Position is sort of the second stage in our photographer's project planning roadmap. The idea here is to sort of guide you through the process of planning and executing a project, and hopefully we'll sort of wind up at some point in the future. I have a sort of rough number of these planned, but as I go along, I may change the number of them, and this should take us through the summer, I'm thinking, in terms of how often we'll be able to get some of these ideas out there. So I'd like to thank a couple more people for, first of all, John for his great donation from the donate button on the cameraposition.com webpage, and also those of you who have left comments on the iTunes store. Boy, is that just great, because it does certainly help get me placed in a better spot on iTunes, and that gets me more listeners, and more listeners is a big motivation for getting this content out there. So thanks so much. First problem here, of course, is to figure out what you want to do. What do you want to do with a project? And of course, that problem is ultimately the crux of camera position in a general way, I think, and that is creativity. What is the creative impulse, and how do we define it, and how do we nurture it? And while I don't know if you can come up with a definition of creativity, certainly a number of people have tried to examine the creative impulse. Certainly a lot of psychologists have tried to examine the creative impulse. And certainly I've tried to examine the creative impulse over time here at Camera Position. And certainly one of the things that I've talked about a lot is the idea of past experiences. Remembering past experiences, remembering things that were significant to you in your past, but also forgetting past experiences and moving beyond them to try to think of new ideas, and then ultimately synthesizing things that matter to you, maybe perhaps from past experiences, with new experiences and new ideas, and ultimately grasping and nurturing this inspiration. And certainly much of what we've talked about in the past on Camera Position has had to do with mining your own values. Who are you? What sorts of things do you like in the world? How do you know what you like, and how do you know why you like those things? What do you want in your life? And I think ultimately what do you want in your photography has a lot to do with what do you want in your life. What are your goals? What things do you find important in the world? Sometimes the answers to these things come from finding or formulating a problem. George Neller, an American psychologist, called this stage first insight, kind of coming up with that initial notion, that initial idea, and then researching and drawing from life experiences or memories, and networking, kind of putting new things together. Various psychologists have variously called this discovery and saturation. And then what happens then, I think, in our mind, the way psychologists have defined this thought process, is mulling over the problem in a sort of chaos, a kind of a stew of ideas and knowledge, and letting go of certainties, letting go of things that you already know, and trying to formulate new ideas. And Jakob Getzel, the American psychologist, called this stage incubation, engaging the intuitive, non-sequential or global thinking that ultimately is at the core of creativity. And essentially what happens is that with this sort of mulling over, stewing together of all of these ideas, what happens is that one or more ideas kind of float to the surface. Some psychologists call this illumination. And the idea is then tested as this sort of potential solution to the problem. Getzel called that verification. And that final stage often involves some revision, some conscious structuring and editing of the created material. Well, that's all well and good, but how do you get to that sort of initial stage of coming up with idea? And one of the ways that I find useful is using a technique that I have called hard and soft. I have on the cameraposition.com website a PDF document that kind of goes through this process, and I'll replicate it in part on the cameraposition.com webpage, but ultimately downloading the PDF called Hard and Soft is going to be useful in order to kind of follow through with this exercise. So what you find on that PDF is a list of some concepts, some ideas, or words rather, that look at conceptual knowledge. And what I will ask you to do here is, all by yourself, without any input from anyone else, write down those things that you associate with being soft in a box that's on the page called soft, and write those you associate with being hard in the box called hard. And then once you're done, what we do is kind of go through and see if we can interpret this this separation, the ways in which you've grouped these two things together. So while the easiest way to do this is to download the PDF document that I've created and use it, for those of you playing at home who don't have the option of downloading the PDF, just grab a pencil and a piece of paper and put a column hard and a column soft, and I will read off these words for you. Logic, metaphor, dream, reason, precision, humor, consistency, ambiguity, play, work, exact, approximate, direct, focused, fantasy, reality, paradox, diffuse, analysis, hunch, generalization, specifics, child, adult. So once you've segregated those words into these two different categories, hard and soft, we'll take a little pause here so that you can kind of perhaps go back, pause and rewind a bit if you missed them, or if you're filling this out in the PDF form, take a little pause here and pause your recorder if you need to, or your player if you need to, and I'll be right back. All right, now once you have completed that, there is on the second page of this same PDF, the hard and soft PDF, a sort of an interpretation of this hard and soft exercise. And I always like to start this out by saying that there are two kinds of people in this world, those who divide everything into two groups and those who don't. But this second side here helps you interpret this hard and soft exercise. So if you take a moment to think about the question, how would you compare your hard list with the soft one? Would it be objective versus subjective, qualitative versus quantitative, masculine versus feminine? And when you look at the final list you came up with, you'll see that the items on the hard side have definite right and wrong answers. And on the soft side, there may be many right answers to each word. On the hard side, there are things that are black and white. On the soft side, there are many shades of gray. And a few people who completed this exercise might say that you can pick up the things on the hard side, like a bar of metal, and the soft things are a bit harder to grab onto, like a handful of water. Now, if you take the list of words that you have segregated into hard or soft, if you take those words and add the word thinking behind the words in both boxes, diffuse thinking, precise thinking, etc., you may see some of those terms in a slightly different light. Soft thinking has many of the characteristics on the soft list. It's metaphorical, approximate, diffuse, humorous, playful, capable of dealing with contradiction. Hard thinking, on the other hand, tends to be more logical, more precise, more exact, more specific, and more consistent. We might say that hard thinking is like a spotlight. It's bright and clear and intense, but the focus is very, very narrow. Where soft thinking tries to find similarities and connections among things, hard thinking focuses on their differences. For example, soft thinking might say that a cat and a refrigerator have a lot in common. They both have a place to put fish, they both have tails, they both come in a variety of colors. The hard thinker would establish the cat and the refrigerator as being members of two separate sets. Well, of course, the question is, what in the heck does this have all to do with being a creative photographer? And to understand that, we have to look at the two main phases of the development of new ideas, the germinal phase and the practical phase. In the germinal phase, ideas are generated and manipulated. In the practical phase, they're evaluated and executed. And I'll go back to those first few ideas that we talked about creative impulse and the way psychologists have defined creative impulse. To use a biological metaphor, the germinal phase sprouts the new ideas, and the practical phase harvests those new ideas. Both types of thinking play an important role in the creative process, but usually during different phases. Soft thinking is very useful in the germinal phase when you're hunting for new ideas, thinking about and manipulating problems. Hard thinking, on the other hand, is best used in the practical phase, when you're evaluating ideas, narrowing in on practical solutions, and preparing to carry an idea into action. The problem that we have is that most of us were raised and educated in an educational system that's strong on teaching people all about all the hard or practical side of thinking. For example, 2 plus 2 equals 4, I before E except after C, etc. But our educational systems aren't particularly good about teaching people about soft or germinal thinking, so we kind of end up having to teach it to ourselves. And so we're not all that adept at soft thinking. It takes a little bit of practice to do it well. It also takes some practice to recognize when you're doing hard thinking, which is a good and necessary thing in many ways, but whether you're doing that hard thinking too much or doing it at the wrong time. Now, think about the way you decide on what you're going to do with a photographic project, or what you'll do with those photographs once you've made them, and how you'll transform your photography into something new. Think about how your thought process works. Begin to recognize when you're using hard thinking concepts and try to replace the germinal phase of idea creation with soft thinking concepts. So the idea here is to create new ideas. And to create new ideas, we really have to put ourselves into the mindset of creating new ideas. And I think this exercise might be useful to you in terms of mining your past, thinking about what you are interested in, and then perhaps going through this hard and soft exercise in terms of just thinking about the way you think. Because so often we block ourselves in our creative process of even just coming up with a new project. We block ourselves by sort of thinking in a hard way without thinking about the soft possibilities of creating new ideas. And it's that soft possibility of creating new ideas that really is the essence of the creative process. So we will pick up next time with what to do once you have an idea, where that idea is going to go, and what happens once you've created that idea in your head for that project. So thanks, and we look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Camera Position, a podcast about the creative side of photography. Camera Position is a proud member of the Photocast Network, your photo resource in the potosphere. photocastnetwork.com